Welcome, everybody, to this special session with Thomas Hübl, Tami Simon, and William Ury. We're all gathered here to celebrate the publication of Thomas's book entitled Healing Collective Trauma, a Process for Integrating Our Intergenerational and Cultural Wounds. My name is Amy Elizabeth Fox. I'm one of Thomas's senior students, and I'm very honored to be hosting this gathering. In a moment, Thomas will share a bit about the book and then invite our special guest to join us. Tami Simon is the CEO of the book's publishing company, Sounds True, and William Ury, our dear friend, is the co-founder of Harvard's program on negotiation and a leading expert on negotiation and mediation. For those of you new to this work, Thomas Hübl is a speaker, author, and founder of the Academy of Inner Science. He has worked with tens of thousands of people worldwide through his workshops, multi-year training programs, and online courses. Thomas's work more recently has guided large-scale healing events that have brought together parties from a variety of cultural issues. For example, bringing together Germans and Israelis to acknowledge, face, and heal the cultural shadow left by the Holocaust. He is also the founder of the nonprofit organization, the Pocket Project, which aims to increase awareness and understanding of collective trauma, as we'll be discussing today, and to reduce its effects and aftermath. Most recently, Thomas hosted an online summit on collective trauma, which was attended by more than 100,000 people globally. So it's very exciting to see the momentum and interest and excitement about this topic really taking hold around the world. At any time, you can find out more about the book and order a copy by visiting the webpage for the book, collectivetraumabook.com, collectivetraumabook.com. So a warm welcome to everyone. And Thomas, it's always a privilege to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everybody. Yes, as you can understand, I'm very happy to be sitting here today and also soon in conversation with Tami and William, who generously agreed to join us here today and to announce the publication of my new book, Healing Collective Trauma. I want to give you today a little taste of what's in the book and what inspired me to write the book. And then I'm happy to have a conversation with Tami and William, and we will discuss the relevance of the book for today's world. Just short that when I came back after like a deep retreat and started to teach, and then my groups grew pretty quickly, I came across a phenomenon that, because at that time, 18 or more years ago, I wasn't really looking for finding collective trauma. That was not the center of my attention. But in the process, in the group processes that I led, and it started at that time in Europe, in also the German-speaking area of Europe, we saw massive eruptions and the same process design that I came to understand more and more, and also wrote in the book about how collective trauma actually showed up when we managed to create a certain level of group coherence, safety with one another, and a kind of a deeper relational commitment. And so the fact that that kept happening over and over again made me curious, and I started to learn and study that, and that initiated me onto a path that collective trauma actually became a big center of my work today. And ever since, we've worked with so many thousands and thousands of people all around the world. And I want to say that the book is not just a writing about the understanding of collective trauma, although that's also like a big part of what's in the book. But I see the writing is everybody who ever joined one of the groups and everybody who ever was part of one of the CTIPs, the collective trauma integration processes, actually added something to this book and added something to my understanding of collective trauma. And we, in the book, there is we all know about the hero's journey. And I want to read a section of the book that I think speaks to our time, and it also speaks to the book. It's more at the beginning of the book. And it says, every hero's journey is one of ultimate transformation. The story of the fool is to become wise, and the story of the cynic is to break open in vulnerability and authenticity, to become real. The story of the despairing is to find hope, faith, and renewal. The story of the fearful or weak is to awaken into the nobility of one's own true strength. These are fundamental journeys of the spirit, the narrative arc of souls. Of course, before we embark, we must respond to the call, a clarion invitation that is always sounding, but can only be heard in the heart of the great longing. At this time in human history, there is a new calling, a powerful invitation rising from a sense of deep collective longing. It calls us toward a shared quest, one that will entail both practical and spiritual action. At its core, it's a journey of collective healing. To succeed, we must begin to make whole the rift between the worlds of science and spirit, to create a sacred marriage between vital yet formally contradictory domains. Its fulfillment brings unity in place of division, integration rather than separation. As with all great heroic journeys, our very survival depends on it. And so with this book, in my exploration of collective trauma, pretty quickly I came to understand that there is a dimension to trauma which often is seen as a personal kind of overwhelming, traumatizing event, and us dealing with our traumatizations with therapists and in trauma therapy. And I think modern trauma science revealed so much and so many amazing insights about the effects of trauma, PTSD, complex PTSD. So we put a whole section into the book exploring individual traumatization and the nature of trauma from a scientific and from a mystical perspective. And but then I came to understand, wow, when we worked on these group processes and after war and after Second World War, Germany, how actually there's a big difference if a trauma happens in a stable, more or less stable cultural environment, or if a trauma happens with many people going through similar traumatizations at the same time. Because an individual, to be an individual doesn't mean to be separate. To be an individual means that I'm a specific expression of the whole. So the individual and the collective are always interdependent. But sometimes we might feel very separate. Separation can be a deep state of my subjective feeling and experience of the world. And I believe that at the heart of the architecture of separation is trauma. And more so, at the heart of the architecture of separation are thousands of years of trauma Trauma didn't start with us, and it didn't start with the trauma that our grandparents went through, our parents. It's a very long line of impacts that impacted our life deeply, that many generations, because we're also not the first ones who are healing trauma, so we just call it that way, but we have a long history of traditions of trying to integrate and free ourselves from the after effects of trauma. And so more and more I came to understand there is individual trauma, but the systemic dimension of trauma is so important because it is so unconscious to our daily experience. Because we have been born into a world that is traumatized already for a long time, and not entirely traumatized, but trauma is part of our social fabric. And I think it's very important to reveal the systemic aspect and also to reveal the power that we have together as communities to become a healing force. And that's why I believe the collective hero's journey is that many people, and we saw it also with the summit, that there many people feel resonant to address the current issues that we see so vividly expressed in our current world, in our current societies. We see so many fragmentations, polarizations, otherings, rifts, and canyons in our societal framework that show the architecture of separation pretty intensively. And with a global pandemic, we have a huge stress factor that brings out or brings up basically and makes visible what is dormant in our collective unconscious. And the more I got to understand the collective dimension of trauma, I thought, wow, we are on the verge to step into a new time, into a new era of collective healing. Collective healing is a process where we come together and we create the right environment. And Tami and William, we will talk in a minute about something that we are, I believe, all passionate about, that the collective dimension, that we are all part of each other's experience and nobody is out there. There is no out there. We are all in here together as this humanity, as this planet, as the ecosystem that we are living in is part of us. It's not that it's out there as nature and here I am. No, it's an interdependent whole. And the notion that there is that separation is at the root of our climate crisis. And so in the book, we go through the learning more about individual trauma, and I share more about the work that we do on the one-on-one level also, and some of the principles that we apply there, also from the mystical principles combined with trauma science. And then we look at the nature of collective trauma and deepen that. And then there's a section in the book that is deeply dedicated to the process design that I found. We call it collective trauma integration process. And that's a process with a certain design that has different waves and levels, how it unfolds, and how we, as large groups or as groups, can work on the integration process of collective trauma of the past. And there's a part where we describe the qualities and the capacities that we need as facilitators to do that kind of work, and what are trainings and tools and practices to study and learn. And then at the last part of the book deals with the massive symptoms that we can see nowadays. And this is, of course, there we can only mention some, but we mention enough, I guess, to get an impression of how many symptoms are actually based on collective trauma. And a potential vision, what can we do? Because I think the fact that we can realize collective trauma together and the fact that we have the power of coherence, the power of technology, I mean, what connects us right now is part of the development on the planet that is needed to take care of it. And on the one hand, we could say, oh, it's such a heavy topic. It's kind of depressive because there's so much trauma. And while we are talking, more is being inflicted. So how can we ever deal with that? But on the other hand, and I think, William, in your work, the third side that we actually, and I would love to hear you speak afterwards about this, like that we have the power of collective coherence building, that we have the power to intensify our relational capacity, and with it create the resources we need. So we lead to something that I found is amazing, that from a certain level of group process, the groups, while integrating or while working on collective trauma, actually emerge into a different collective state. And that state is what I call the emergence of the collective witness. It's different than me looking at another person sharing something. There's a new quality of witnessing that is much more intense and that allows us to listen to each other with much more presence and with a deep quality of presence in the room that I found happened again and again and again. And also one time I spoke to for the Collective Trauma Summit with Otto Schammer, who and Otto had a similar experience in one of his training programs, and the power of that kind of presence is equally promising as is the capacity that we as human beings can take care of the legacy of our mutual past. Because I believe with every trauma healing, we actually liberate frozen life. We integrate the energy that we harvest into our lives, and we become more happy, more alive, more expressive, and also more participating in the process of life of our world. And at the same time, I believe we are also liberating our capacity to participate in the future of innovation and restructuring the world as we need it today. And the last part maybe is that when we see systems development in a very simplified version with three forces, so we can say there's evolution, which is the drive where I really want to learn. I want to develop. I'm so happy if I can develop and learn more and express myself. And we see children when they are in this drive, they really want to learn. We want to get to know the world, and we actually want to expand our perspectives continuously. So evolution is pulsing in the veins of our beings anyway. The other force is that we are able to create structures. We're able to create companies, we are able to create societies, we're able to create internal structures in our nervous systems. But those structures are not rigid and fixed. They are structures that are needed, but when life and evolution need something new, they can be opened up and reconstructed. So habits can be changed through education, activation energy, and the evolutionary drive pulsing forward. But then there is a third, and that's trauma and collective trauma. That cannot be changed through pushing. And we see this in the climate change conversation because there is an urgency. But if the urgency hits the frozen part of life, we get it back as resistance. And it looks like it's the sand in the engine that makes change very hard. And I believe that's why the understanding of the collective dimension of trauma is so crucial at the moment, because we need the skills to de-ice parts of our societies and our societal structures in order to have that energy available to create a better world, and the world, I often call it a house that we all want to live in. And so in that sense, first of all, I'm very happy to share this with you and to share 18 years of concentrated work with you. And I'm happy now to welcome you, Tami and William, into the conversation. And so maybe I hand it over to you, Amy, to introduce Tami and William, and then we will have a conversation together.
Thanks, Thomas, and for that beautiful imagery around the restoration of collective trauma. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our two guests for this celebration of the publication of Thomas's book. We're joined this afternoon by Tami Simon, the founder of the multimedia publishing company Sounds True, which has been dedicated for decades to disseminating spiritual wisdom into the world. Sounds True has published more than 800 audio, video, music, and book titles, along with sponsoring online courses and events, and is widely recognized as a pioneer in providing life-changing practical tools that accelerate spiritual awakening and personal transformation. So on behalf of all of us, welcome, Tami, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. A privilege. Thank you.
And our second guest is William Ury, as I mentioned, is the co-founder of Harvard Law School's program on negotiation and is one of the world's leading experts on negotiation, conflict resolution, and mediation. William is the co-author of the seminal book, Getting to Yes, which sold 15 million copies and has been translated in over 35 languages. William has also been joining Thomas in a number of online offerings these last years. So delighted you could be with us today. Welcome, William.
It's a real pleasure to join you, Amy, and a real pleasure to be here, Thomas, on this auspicious occasion of launching, I think, what is a vital message that humanity needs to hear at this particular moment in our wounded world.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll start off the dialogue among the three of you just with an opening question for you, if I could, Tami. You founded Sounds True 35 years ago with a mission to wake up the world through disseminating spiritual wisdom from some of the leading teachers and visionaries of our time. Since you have access to many different teachers and authors and traditions, we'd be wonderfully interested to hear from you what stands out for you about this book, how it contributes to your vision of what Sounds True is bringing to the world, and how you think about what it can do for the readers that you're publishing to.
In terms of what stands out, I think there's not another book that certainly Sounds True is published, but that I have read that addresses so directly the group process and what's possible when people get together and come out of the individual process. I know for me in my own journey of working through trauma, there can be a feeling sometimes of kind of coming out of the darkness and a hiddenness. I'd go so far as to even say a quality of shame about the trauma that I've confronted in my own life. And I certainly hear that from other people. The idea that we could be together in a gathering of hundreds of people and first of all, go through a process that's been tested and refined, what Thomas calls the collective trauma integration process, that's written about in quite some detail in the book, that we could go through this time-tested process and really create a field, this is my language, of love together and acceptance and shared humanity. And by going through that, have this group healing. That is so profound to me, and I think is a new evolutionary step for us as brave individuals who are willing to come forward and be vulnerable in a loving and safe, and creating that loving and safe relational field is, I think, some of the magic of Thomas's work. So right there, I have more to say about how this, I think, fits Sounds True's waking up in the world vision. But right there, I just want to pause because I think it's such an important contribution that this new book is making.
Yeah, beautiful. And maybe, William, just an opening question to you, and I'll turn it back to Thomas. Obviously, you and Thomas come from different backgrounds, and yet your interests have really converged in the last few years, working together, teaching an online course together. And I'd love to hear from you what you found about the book or Thomas's work that has resonated with you, and how you apply it or think about it in your own mediation and conflict work. And Thomas referenced the third side earlier, so maybe if I could also ask you just to explain for our listeners what that is and how that intersects with your collaboration.
Well, very deeply. Thank you, Amy. The work that Thomas and I have done together, this dialogue that we began between the mystic and the mediator, began in Jerusalem, in a 4-hour conversation that was so wide-ranging. I was just about to walk, retrace the ancient steps of Abraham there in the Middle East, and there in one of the most traumatized parts of the world, where if you can imagine humanity like a body, the Middle East is like the pinched nerve. It's where Thomas is sitting right now, this moment. It's like the place where so much pain gets referred. And the question that I think faces us right now at this particular point in our history and our evolution is, can humanity learn to heal itself? Can we learn to heal ourselves? Can we learn to live together? And that's the question that I've really devoted my life to asking, because with the advent of the nuclear era, and I grew up in the shadow of that bomb, both in the United States and in Europe, the real question is, either we learn to live together or we perish. And so I've devoted my life to the question of, how do we get to yes? How do we negotiate? How do we negotiate our differences? How do we reach an agreement? And I worked in different parts of the world, war zones, and it's not easy. And I've always, been asking myself, what makes it so hard for us to get to yes when it seems so much in our interest? And I think a good part of that answer lies in what Thomas and his work focus on, which is, under the surface, there's so much wounding, there's so much trauma, there have been so many overwhelming events. I've been working the last 10 years in the country of Colombia as a senior advisor to the president about how do you end a 50-year civil war where 250,000 people have died, 8 million victims. How do you heal something like that? And what I've found is there's negotiation, which is really important, but there's a deeper level, which I think Thomas's work addresses and this book really focuses on, which is there's a level of collective trauma that if we don't deal with that level, then you get repetition. And so often in world conflicts, you see that you reach a ceasefire, you reach an agreement, but it only holds for a bit, and then the forces emerge again. So to me, the work that's reflected in Thomas's book is critical if we as humanity are going to learn to put an end to wars, deal with the climate crisis, if we're going to learn to live together, which I think is so vital to our survival. And I'll just say one more thing, because Thomas asked me about the third side. About 30 years ago, I went to the country of South Africa, which at that moment was engaged in the huge struggle around apartheid. And most people thought this was going to be bloodshed forever, between the blacks and the whites and so on. And in the midst of that, I went to visit, because I'm an anthropologist by training, a group of San, what we call them the Bushmen, but they're, the San tribesmen there in the middle of the Kalahari, because I wanted to study how the oldest, in some ways, the people who live closest the way that we as humans live for 99% of the time, how do they deal with this situation? And what they deal with is very much like the work that Thomas brings to mind is it's when there's a conflict, it's not just between individuals or between groups, it's considered that it's the groups, the collective responsibility to contain that, to create a space. So all the women and the men and the children, when tempers go high and people reach for their poison arrows, which are fatal, obviously, in that context, someone goes and hides the arrows out in the middle of the desert, and they all gather around the campfire and they talk and they listen for days on end, and they dance and they call in the wisdom of the spirits through trance dancing. But what they do is they treat conflict not as we do, which is always that there's two sides, one side versus the other, Democrats versus the Republicans in the electoral contest right now here in this country, Arabs versus Israelis. But they see that there's a third side, and the third side is the side of the whole. It's the side of the future. It's, in Thomas's words, that listens to the whisper of the future. And that third side is like a social immune system that allows the community to come to terms. And after a few days, a solution emerges, but it's not enough just to come up with an agreement. There has to be a fundamental healing. There has to be the ethical repair that Thomas talks about in his book, where there has to be forgiveness and reconciliation. And there's a whole system that is our birthright, really. So I think what we face today and what Thomas's book speaks to is the challenge of how do we recreate, how do we strengthen that third side with the internet, with all this technology. And that's what I've been pleased to do with Thomas's experiments around how do we create global campfires in which humanity can hold, whether it's North Korea or whether it's political polarization or whether it's the climate crisis. We've run a series of experiments that I think using the technologies and methodologies that Thomas has evolved and the ones that I've worked on to see if we can find ways in which humanity can learn to heal itself. And so it's a real pleasure to be at this meeting and to be able to celebrate Thomas's book.
Yeah, that's beautiful, William. It's beautiful. And first of all, I really enjoy when we met 4 years, I think, ago, or so it's already some time ago in Jerusalem, that there was this initial resonance. And I think over time we found out what that means. And that's beautiful because we discovered so many shared interests. And I would love to highlight for a moment, and then maybe to hear from both of you how you see the relevance of the book for our world, and maybe what you are working on also in our world. But that immune system, like that I discovered through the work that there is a powerful ally. And the powerful ally is that the world wants to heal. If we allow it, the world wants to heal. That's why I respond to the immune system that you spoke about, because trauma on the one hand is that frozen layer of frozen life that is locked at a certain time, space, location in our collective consciousness, and it stays there until we really tend to it. It doesn't go away by itself. It needs attention. And so I believe that when we look at well-being is deeply connected to right relation, and that in all of us, the self-healing mechanism that takes care that the skin heals when one cuts him or herself, like the same mechanism wants to heal the tissue of life. And if we see collective trauma being born into a society when there's racism or slavery, or there's a Native American genocide or a Rwandan genocide or a Holocaust, that's scarred tissue. That's scar tissue. And we have been born into that as the world that we got to know. We grew up in that society and we say, yeah, that's the world. And then through our lives and through our awareness processes, we find out and we maybe transcend it. But that immune system is alive in all of us. And I believe that's why the collective healing journey is now calling us to express that function that you so beautifully call the third side. And so maybe Tami, do you want to speak first about how you see the relevance right now in the world of healing collective trauma?
Well, I mean, quite honestly, and maybe this is intuitively obvious, I actually can't think of a more relevant or important topic in our time. I mean, we're facing a climate crisis, as you referenced in your opening comments, Thomas, that cannot be healed unless our core sense of separation, which you also referenced, which is really at the root of trauma. When we feel traumatized, and the trauma we've inherited as human beings is that we feel like a separate self. That trauma, we feel we're not intrinsic with nature, we're separate from nature, acting upon it with our carbon emissions, et cetera. So if we don't heal our collective trauma at its root, we will not potentially have a future of an inhabitable planet for human beings. So I can't think of anything more relevant. I also think that what's interesting is that in our time, the ways that our collective trauma has been pushed underneath and kept unearthed, it's coming up, it's surfacing, it's here, it's right with us. It's with us with the Me Too movement, who said, enough, no more traumatic sexual abuse of women. We won't be silenced any longer. It's with us now in the United States in terms of racial injustice and the Black Lives Matter movement. We will not be silenced any longer. So we're in a time when it's stirred up, it's on the surface, and we need these technologies that bring us into relationship together and into this kind of coherent relationship, Thomas, that actually I think it would be wonderful to hear more about in this celebration of your work and the healing of collective trauma, because I think that's so important. Because to me, that's the space of the heart. This is my own feeling of it. And that's what makes room for this invitation, for this witnessing presence to have become available for us so we can access it through our tender and open hearts. And I think we have to get here. We have to get to this witnessing presence through the individual heartbreak and do this on a large scale. So part of what is so exciting to me about this time and about your work and the publication of this book, combined with the web technology that we have to link people in this witnessing presence. Even as you were referring to it in your opening comments, there was a moment when I felt it. Same, William, when you were talking about it, that there's a way that we can actually access this greater collective shared sense of what's happening in what seems like polarization, that we can join together in something that's beyond our separateness and in witnessing that space. And I think that's exactly the most important thing we need right now, is to be in that place together on a large scale.
Yes, I completely agree with everything you said so beautifully. And William, do you, what's your take? Is there anything you would love to share?
Well, first of all, Thomas, I'm just remembering a conversation we had, and we've had so many of them, and you just come from a teaching, and you said to me, what I'm realizing, William, is that, I'm listening to everyone's individual traumas in this group, large teaching, and I'm realizing more and more that it's all collective trauma. that everyone's individual trauma, that, that like, I don't know, I can't remember what the percentage you gave me, but, it was like, 80 or 90% of it, what we think of as individual trauma, which we experience individually, actually links into a deeper underlying collective trauma. So, I think that's really what's beautiful about the book, is it's highlighting that underlying aquifer, as it were, of unprocessed emotions which is calling for healing. And I love, your metaphor too of the, that the wound wants to heal itself. When you have a gash on your skin, the two sides want to come together. And that's my experience in conflict. Is it's amazing in these, whether it's Afghanistan or the Middle East, it's like, you take these two opposite sides, or here in this country between, the right and the left right now, you take these two sides and they seem so polar, opposite. But if you bring them into a room and you bring them into the right space, you evoke that collective witness, that collective presence, they want to move towards each other. It's not that, I or anyone else as the magic mediator has to force them together. There's an inherent desire. You're there just to help midwife a process that wants to happen. And to me, that's really what needs to take place. And I'll just say too, because, we're right now, in this moment, in this, Tami was referring to it, here in this country right now, in addition to the pandemic, which is just so stressful, and the economic crisis that it brings on. And then in the midst of a climate crisis here in Colorado, we've had these wildfires, which are directly related to, this sense of separation of us, imposing our will on nature instead of living in harmony with nature. And then on top of it, we have this political and social crisis, the racial unrest, but also this around the political polarization in this country. And the amazing thing is, we're aware of it from the media, of all the polar antagonisms and all the fears that generates, to the point that, over half of Americans, would agree with the idea that somehow we might be, if not now, within 5 years, on the verge of something unthinkable like civil war. I mean, it's reached that level of intensity. At the same time, if you look at the third side, which is invisible, I've watched as in the midst of this, Americans have turned out in historic proportions for an election in the midst of a pandemic, and it's been remarkably peaceful. Contrary to, we're in a polarized society. You have a society afloat with weapons. It doesn't mean that there won't be violence, but that, to me, why is that? It's because of the innate resilience of the system. And I've watched it as the voices of what I call the third side, which is of women, of business and labor, and the civil society, and leaders of faith, have all come together, and they've made statements, very strong statements, about how we have to get through this in a peaceful, free, and fair way. So we're dealing with this wave of tension, but we're getting through it, and it's remarkable to see that happen. And that is the third side. That is the innate, underestimated aspect of that collective, helping us go through a very, very difficult moment. And so, to me, all the things that we're talking about, which are the possibility of, on a global scale, of evoking and energizing and midwifing that power of collective presence, of collective witness, to me is the key to us having the world that we would like, and that we would like our children and grandchildren to grow up in.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And I want to respond to a few things that both of you said. Is that first of all, like, sometimes we look at trauma, like we call trauma the event that we went through, when in fact the trauma response is an intelligent function within our bodies and nervous systems to protect us. The after effects are after effects of a process that hasn't been integrated, but at the time when it happened, it was super helpful. And it's super helpful that in our society, the pain of millions of people in concentration camps in Europe is collectively suppressed, because if it were to come up at once, it would have a terrible, terrible effect. So on the one hand, that we are dealing, even in the trauma response, we are dealing with something that's beneficial. And that means that for every one of us, the defense mechanisms that help us to protect and get through, that we suffer from because they have sometimes severe side effects, they are intelligent. And the trauma work is actually deeply hopeful because it restores one thing, that there's a deep, innate and inherent intelligence that we try to do the best psychologically and physically in the given environment that we grow up and that we go through also culturally. And that means that the dysfunctions that we label dysfunctional in ourselves are actually functions that we don't understand. So right relation starts within myself, that the fracture, the where I feel partial or not whole, is where I learn through inner mediation, as you would say, William, inner mediation or awareness processes inside create an internal experience of myself that is more whole and integrated. And the same is true on the collective level. So we are dealing actually with mechanisms that we just need to understand better. And here's the thing, that the second part about trauma, I believe that is crucial, is we grew up in a world where we have one severe epidemic, and that's the split of mind, emotion, and body. So when the mind is in service of, as you said before, Tami, of the heart, or we could also say when the mind is synchronized with the emotion and the body, or we could say when the mind is in service of nature, because my body is nature. It's the closest nature to my experience, or the closest part of the planet to my experience. If my mind is a servant of nature, it's an amazing blessing with all the scientific breakthroughs and all the stuff that we can do and build and think about. But if my mind becomes a disconnected, what I call a helicopter mind, that is flying on top of nature, it becomes a weapon. And I think right relation is also healing, that we can think about many things that we cannot live. I can know a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that that's my development. My development is what I can live. We call it walk our talk. And I believe that relation, but if I start to listen to those mechanisms, as you said, it looks like very polarized, but actually in the same room, there is a movement that wants to come together, because those parts in us and in our society actually want to heal. And I believe we can become midwives. Good facilitation work is not that I bring my idea what should be. No, I bring a capacity to listen to the inherent forces of the system. And I'm able to become a partner of that which wants to heal, but is kind of frozen in space and time. And that's why I created a lot of past. And so, yeah, maybe if any one of you wants to comment on that, or anything else that you would love to.
Well, I'd like to share one more thing that's very meaningful to me about the book, and it's a different dimension than what we've been talking about, which has to do with the healing of intergenerational trauma and the potential we have to give a gift to our family lineage, our biographical lineage. And I'm bringing that up because for me, some of the hardest personal growth work I've ever done and still continue to do has to do with becoming aware of, as you say, these frozen parts that I inherited from generations back in my family. And coming from a Jewish family lineage and experiences, memories of persecution and other, that it's been so deep in me. And I feel like part of my work at this time in my own life is I very much want to give a gift to my family lineage. And it's not an easy gift to give. And your book was helpful to me in that regard. And I wonder if you have some comments about that, Thomas.
Yes, I do. I think that what you brought up is so important, that like there's individual trauma and then there's our ancestral stream, like the ancestors, and the trauma information that circulates throughout the generations. And that the gift we can give to our ancestors is tending and turning towards that which is hard to see, like exactly how I described it. It's hard to work on it. It's not easy, and it comes with discomfort. But to turn towards the discomfort in our life needs courage, and it needs love, and it brings love to the places where it was seemingly lacking. And somebody in the lineage needs to do that. That's, I think, also part of the hero's journey. Somebody within a lineage needs to not run away from it, but turn toward it and find out in the darkness how we can see. And I believe that's such an important process. And I have seen many families where one person started that work, and then there was a ripple effect into the family system, and the system started to change, started to heal. And I can see in the process work how the energy ripples back into the lineage, into the family system, and how much more personal well-being we can have by doing that intergenerational work. And so, yes, Tami, I think absolutely that's a very important part of the whole collective trauma healing. Yes. Maybe William, do you feel?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing I've learned from you, Thomas, and I really appreciate that it's richly reflected in your book, is the spirit of possibility. Because trauma, as I think you mentioned, and Tami also, it can be a heavy thing. It feels like a heavy thing. It's like there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of frozenness. It feels like hard work, and it is hard work. But what I love about your work, Thomas, is there's a lightness that you bring to the heavy work. You don't. It's not a superficial lightness that you go over it. You go deep into it, into the heart of it. And that's what I've also found in my own experience in dealing with war zones, is if you go right into the heart of it, there's actually a place of lightness, a place of spaciousness. And I think, spaciousness is one of your key words, of like bringing spaciousness, and also just the way in which you, for example, like personally, as Tami was saying, I deal with those parts of me that are frozen. And, the way in which you talk about frozenness, I was tending to think, frozenness is a problem. It's like a problem, right? And it's a problem you got to solve. But the way you approach it, the way you frame it, is that, frozenness is actually an intelligent response. It was an intelligent response in the moment. And by recognizing and even appreciating and being grateful actually for the intelligence of your system at that moment, for coping with what might have been an overwhelming event, that somehow approaching it in that way of welcoming. And I love the way you use hosting, hosting the phenomenon within us individually and collectively. There's a there's, to use Tammy's word, there's a loving approach here that I find is the key to healing, to dealing with the darkness, to transforming that darkness, to bringing the light and spaciousness. And that's something I deeply appreciate in you and your work and in this book.
Oh, that's very beautiful. Thank you. And likewise, first of all, because I remember once we had an event and I asked you, hey, William, why are you dealing with all those conflicts? Is there nothing that is more fun than that? And I asked that with a special reason, because it's so clear to see that when you do this work, you bring light into situations that for many people are very difficult. And so when it's our purpose to do a certain kind of work, there is a light that we bring into very difficult moments, because that's our purpose. That's part of why we are here. And so I love this about your work. And I think that's also what creates effects in the mediation, that you know, that's not everybody can do that. No, it's only when that's our purpose, then there is actually a love we bring into the suffering. And I think that's important. And the other part, that's why I believe that that's also what the book is about, it's a dialogue between science and what I call inner science or mystical science, that a deep spiritual anchor in a deeper place is also bringing, if it's not a bypass, then it's a resource in the healing. And I think so. You mentioned like two very powerful aspects, that collective trauma shows us that actually trauma is not a stigmatization. Trauma is not that something is wrong with me. Trauma means that in very difficult circumstances, I did the best that I could given that outer reality. And I think that's why I believe the book can also help to rewrite weaknesses and strength and all these polarizing assessments into something new, that we understand that there are many more strengths. I often call, like, what many people call weakness, I call our childhood heroes, but they are just misunderstood, and we just want to get rid of them instead of learning to work with them and taking them on board as part of our growth. And so, is there anything important that you want to leave us with? I think we're coming to the end of our hour, and then I want to read another short paragraph and have a few acknowledgments.
Let's train lots of facilitators in the process that you teach. Let's do lots of global online events. Let's go.
Great. Well, I just want to add my personal congratulations to you and all the people who helped you, because the book, as we know, as Tami will know too for sure, is a collective phenomenon, and really just underscore the possibility that this can contribute to, initiate, inspire, a new field really, that of endeavor that humanity sorely needs in these challenging times. So kudos to you, Thomas, and to everyone, and let's, as Tami says, let's get to work.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you to both of you. I find you very generous to be here with me today on this important day. And I love our collaborations, both of our collaborations. And so I hope they will flourish and continue and bring more and more of that healing into the world, because I think that's what we are embarking on, a collective healing journey. And I also want to say a few acknowledgements for the book, because first of all, I want to thank Julie Jordan Everett for helping me in the book writing process and with her amazing skills. So thank you, Julie. I'm not sure if you're listening now, but I'm very grateful for our collaboration. I also want to say that the book also contains essays or parts written by or interviews made with Christina Bettel, Patrick Daugherty, Gabor Mate, Sila Elworthy, Otto Schammer, and also my dear friend Ken Wilber, and some of the summit interviews that have been taken into the have been transcribed and are part. They generously agreed to be part of the book. So thank you for that, and to my senior assistant team for the people that helped me to facilitate these large group processes, and everybody that is working right now in the Pocket Project, the non-profit organization to integrate collective trauma globally. We have initiated 23 labs right now with almost 1,000 people looking at various collective traumas around the world. And then I also want to thank my family, my wife, Judith, and my daughter, Elia, for being so generous and being with me in the time when I work really a lot. And I am all around the world taking care of trauma. And for Judith, for her inspiration and her fabulous art that is the book cover. And I feel deeply blessed by your support. So thank you very much. A lot of your inspiration is also in this book. Yeah, Amy, before I read the final part, I want to leave everybody with a prayer that is also at the end of the book. And Amy, is there anything from your side?
Do you want me to make the announcements now or after the prayer?
Maybe let's do the announcements now.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
And then I'll turn it back to you. So first of all, a deep thanks, Tami and William, for being with us and for the wonderful conversation that just happened. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Let me share a few important details about the book before I turn it back to Thomas to close us. The book is available to purchase in 3 different formats: hardcover, audio, and Kindle. And you can find links to the various booksellers on the homepage for the book, www.collectivetraumabook.com. If you're ordering from outside the US, please check with your preferred retailer or perhaps the Amazon site in your country. We also wanted to let people know that the German translation will be published in March of 2021, and a Dutch translation will follow in May of 2021. If you order a copy of the book right now, I'm delighted to let people know there'll be 2 free gifts coming. All the information about the gifts and the book itself, again, on the book website at collectivetraumabook.com. And Thomas, I just want to, on behalf of all your students worldwide and your team, offer you congratulations on this remarkable accomplishment and this milestone day. We really are so delighted to be able to celebrate with you, and we hope everyone will enjoy the book. And thank you all for joining us today. And Thomas, I'll turn it back to you gratefully to close us with the prayer.
Thank you, Amy. And I thank you very much and for your generous contribution to everything that we talked about today. And I also want to thank everybody that I couldn't name, all our teams in all our organizations that helped to make this book become real, and everybody who worked at Sounds True and in between the fields. So thank you, everybody. It's too many names to name for now, but thank you for everybody that was part of it. Yes, and I, since presence, there is something simple yet deeply complex. I often say integrated history is presence. Unintegrated history is the past. And integrated history is presence, is seeing, and is clarity. And that's at the base. I mean, there are many things that lead to this prayer in the book, but it's about the capacity to be with what's happening right now. This is my prayer, that you and I and all others, our partners, children, families, colleagues, and friends, fill the world with the love of our fullest presence and deepest devotion. We need not worry with how we wish to be or how we would prefer each other to be. We need not worry with any ideal version of ourselves, one another, or the world. My prayer of love is to meet you exactly as you are, to meet myself exactly the way I am, and to meet the world precisely as it is, in the most specific detail, the truest, most naked form. That is my prayer. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Tami. Thank you, William. And thank you, everybody, for listening and joining us here at this amazing day. Thank you very much.